And top Republican senators are signaling progress is being made in discussions with Democrats over potential gun reform legislation.
The bipartisan group of lawmakers is led by Democrat Chris Murphy and Republican John Cornyn. An aide for the Texas Republicans said both sides are working to see if they can agree on a basic framework.
CBS News political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now for more. Hi, Caitlin. So where are some of the areas these lawmakers are willing to compromise? And is there anything that's a complete non-starter in these discussions for either side?
Hey, Tanya. Well, what these lawmakers are focusing on are a very narrow set of proposals. Chris Murphy, as you mentioned, who's leading this discussion, has been at the forefront of this issue since Sandy Hook, has said that while he wants to get a lot of these big items done, he knows what the reality check essentially on Capitol Hill is. So something like an assault weapons ban or any sort of ban on guns is really off the table here. Instead, they're focused on a couple of areas where they believe they can get bipartisan support. And one of those areas is the issue of red flag laws. This is getting a court order to have someone who is deemed mentally unfit to have their guns confiscated from them. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's really kind of at the center here. So you have Chris Murphy and John Cornyn, who's the senior senator from Texas, leading this discussion. Yesterday, they met via Zoom with Tom Tillis, who's a senator from North Carolina, a Republican, and Kyrsten Sinema, who is a senator Democrat from Arizona. They are continuing their discussions this week, but the key is getting something in writing, getting some kind of framework, and quickly. Congress is in recess now. They are expected to return next Monday from recess, and we know that the longer time goes on, the more difficult it is to get legislation through because the pressure tends to subside. So what these lawmakers are trying to do is come up with something narrow that they believe can get 60 votes to proceed, and also they're up against a clock.
Let's speak more about those red flag laws. You mentioned, Caitlin, two other Republican senators, Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal, are discussing that. I know in your reporting yesterday, you mentioned how for Republicans, they seem to support that policy more on a state level, not a federal level. But just tell us where those discussions are and where it might lead.
Yeah, this is an interesting proposal because this is something that Graham and Blumenthal introduced in 2019 and actually has some support from Republicans. But this isn't a big federal bill. What this would do would essentially grant money to states to incentivize them to implement red flag laws. And when we were talking to Lindsey Graham last week, he said that a national red flag law is really out of the question. This would be a grant program to the states to really incentivize them. We also spoke with Blumenthal last week as he was leaving the Capitol to go onto recess, and he said that he felt more hopeful than ever since Sandy Hook that they could come to some kind of agreement that would get enough support here. I asked him, why he sounds optimistic, and he said, "No, I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful." And he believes that because this is a narrower provision, and again, it's this state-based program that could attract some support. People like Marco Rubio were supportive of a similar bill after a shooting in Florida. But this is the key, is what the details are, of course. And for something like red flag laws, they've been passed in Republican states. Indiana is a good example. Mike Pence has touted that as an example. Florida, of course, passed their own after the Parkland shooting. But talking to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, they're resistant, again, to some kind of big federal legislation. When it comes to red flag laws, there's going to be some details that need to be ironed out. How long it takes for the court order, how long the due process takes, who can petition the court to have firearms confiscated. So there's a lot of different details here that Republicans are going to be looking at. But even someone like Rick Scott, who signed into law in Florida as governor a red flag law, said in an interview today that he is resistant to any sort of federal legislation. So again, look at the details, what they come up with, and whether Republicans say this is something best led to the states. And that's why Graham and Blumenthal are proposing this grant-based program. So that's really where the focus is. And we'll see. These lawmakers say that they are meeting over the week through Zoom. And it's also interesting that President Biden has really allowed Congress to take the lead here.
Really fascinating that even Republicans who support some reform on a local level don't feel the same way on a federal level. Really interesting. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much.